What is Marxism? By Comrade Banana Head. Marxism is a philosophy and sociological system of analyzing human institutions and social relations based upon their principal constituent economic classes, as founded by Karl Marx, who was born in the year 1818 and died in 1883. Earl Browder, former General Secretary of the CPUSA, or Communist Party of the USA, put it succinctly when he remarked that Marxism is an interpretation of history which explains the progress of society as a product of the expansion of the forces of production of the material means of life, that is, the development of economy. Marxism looks at human civilization as being based upon its system of producing the necessities and amenities prerequisite for its existence. Marx's collaborator Frederick Engels summed it up in his eulogy for Marx when he stated that, just as Darwin discovered the law of development or organic nature, so Marx discovered the law of development of human history. The simple fact, hitherto concealed by an overgrowth of ideology, that mankind must first of all eat, drink, have shelter and clothing, before it can pursue politics, science, art, religion, etc. Marx undertook a thorough analysis of the most advanced and preeminent system of his era, capitalism, which was still rather young when he began writing about it in the 1840s. The Industrial Revolution had just begun roughly 60 years prior to the writing of the Communist Manifesto in 1848, but Marx and his collaborator Engels recognized it as a revolutionizing force in changing the world. Marx was a prolific writer, and wrote hundreds of articles and approximately 15 books. Despite this, a common theme underlies all of these works: the dialectical process of history, the alienation and exploitation of humanity under capitalism, and inevitable emancipation under socialism. Marx took Hegel and stood him on his head. What he really took and ran with was Hegel's dialectical method. Marx wanted philosophy to be practical, rather than speculative and abstract. He wanted it to deal with the real world. He was a materialist, which in of itself was not a new concept. Materialism, defined by the online encyclopedia Wikipedia, is a philosophical position holding that the only thing that exists is matter. If anything else, such as mental events, exists, then it is reducible to matter. Has been iterated by such notable figures as Thomas Hobbes, Denis Diderot, Baron d'Holbach, and John Locke. What distinguishes Marx's materialism from earlier iterations is the rejection of the mechanistic universe. The idea that the universe, being governed by a set of unchanging laws, is static and unchanging. The writings of Thomas Hobbes are a perfect example of this viewpoint, as he made the observation that humans are part of the natural world which he believed to be governed by physical, i.e. mechanistic, laws. Human relations were thus held by him to be fixed and unchanging. Marx dismissed the notion that human social life was governed by mechanical laws, and instead turned to history and economics so as to understand the human condition through dialectics. The term dialectic is Greek in origin, and was originally dialektos, meaning to engage in debate or dialogue. It is a process by which truth is arrived at or contradictions are resolved. The dialectical process is defined by the online encyclopedia Wikipedia as constituting an exchange of propositions, theses, and counter-propositions, antitheses, resulting in a synthesis of the opposing assertions. Many students of philosophy are first introduced to this process through the study of Socrates, who was renowned for the transcriptions of the discussions he had in which he utilized a question and answer format to induce critical thought in those he spoke with. Hegel introduced Marx to the idea of applying the dialectical process to history. The idea that struggle and contradiction both constitute the engine that drives the course of human events. Ludwig Feuerbach, another influence of Marx's, as well as another follower of Hegel's, denied Hegel's idealism, and inserted instead a mechanistic materialist notion of the universe. This Marx was also to half accept. Marx combined both of these as he applied the dialectical process to materialism, and this combination is famously known, quite simply, as dialectical materialism. Marx replaced Hegel's Geist or spirit with an understanding of nature, work and economics. Marx starts by examining humankind's relationship to matter, to humanity's total environment. This, he held, was central to an analysis of human development. It is the material or immanent world which is real, and our thoughts of it are consequences of it, not causes, of the universe. Preeminent in determining the human relationship to matter/nature is the mode of production, a historically specific form of organizing labor, and the given means of production which is constituted of two components. 1. The forces, or means, of production, the instruments and tools used in the production of material goods, as well as persons capable of using these tools and instruments by virtue of experience and training, and 2. The relations of production, the relations established between people as they acquire and use the forces of production in the production of material goods. Marx identifies several modes of production which have come to pass in human history, but 20th century Marxian anthropologist Eric Wolf has simplified these into 3 stages. 1. The domestic mode of production, wherein there is a localized, or household organization of labor. 2. The tributary mode of production, wherein lords/elites extract tribute from laborers, in this case peasants or serfs. 3. The capitalist mode of production, wherein labor is almost totally alienated, or isolated, from the means of production. Conceived in this way, all prior systems could be placed as subclassifications of the aforementioned 3 modes. In each historical mode of production, there were and are social classes defined by the role they play in the relations of production. These factions or classes each have their own set of interests, and outlooks which reflect those interests. For each faction there is an underlying set of shared experiences, giving rise to what Marx described as class consciousness. Thus the view each class holds regarding government, morality, and religion is an outgrowth of its shared experiences and interests. In each historical mode of production, the ascendant class proclaims that which is in their own interests to be universally beneficial, thus explaining why some members of subordinate classes hold ideas which are in contradiction to their own interests. Under each historical mode of production, there were classes whose interests were in conflict with one another. It is from those such contradictions that cause the currents of history to flow and ebb, i.e. not the hand of God or any such nonsense. All societies, Marx writes, characterized by irreconcilably divergent class contradictions contain within them the seeds of their own destruction. This Marx terms the class struggle, in which exploiters and exploited clash. Under capitalism, the principal contradiction lies between the bourgeois, owners, capitalists, and the proletariat, whom Marx defines as that class of society whose means of livelihood entirely depend on the sale of its labor, and not on the profit derived from capital, whose weal and woe, whose life and death, whose whole existence depend on the demand for labor, hence on the alternation of good times and bad, on the vagaries of unbridled competition. Principles of communism. Central to Marx's work is the concept of alienation, which concerns the separation of humankind from its most valuable resource, its labor power, which for Marx constitutes people's ability to transform the natural world. For one to be made to give this up is tantamount to being alienated from one's own nature, a spiritual loss. This is in addition to the economic scalar alienation causes, as laborers are separated from the fruits of their work. Marx aptly describes alienation in his economic and philosophical manuscripts as follows. The alienation of the worker is expressed. The more he produces, the less he can consume, the more value he creates, the less value he has. Labor produces fabulous things for the rich, but misery for the poor. Machines replace labor, and jobs diminish, while other workers turn into machines. This alienation not only debases humankind by imposing squalor upon it, by separating it from the fruits of its labor as well as its very nature, but moreover depersonalizes it. The elites objectify humanity, by deciding upon the kind of work, the method and rhythm, but never minding if the laborer ends up as a mere appendage of flesh on a machine of iron. Marx's work was infused with both a passionate desire for justice and a sober assessment of reality, taking as the starting point of his analysis the laborer. He took an abstract, idealistic philosophy, brought it down to earth, and made it applicable to our world. We now have Marx's analysis as an invaluable tool with which to understand the human condition and predict the flow of history.
Thank you for your attention. This has been a Comrade Banana Head production.